2 Corinthians chapter 12. Paul is talking about what God is doing through him rather than what he's doing via his own strength. Listen now for God's word for us this morning. But if I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, for I will be speaking the truth. But I refrain from it so that no one may think better of me than what is seen in me or heard from me, even considering the exceptional character of the revelations. Therefore, to keep me from being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this, that it would leave me. But he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Let me get my Super Bowl prediction out of the way, because I've been asked about 3 times already this morning, who are you rooting for? Pulling for the Falcons for 2 reasons. They've never won a Super Bowl before, and 2, one of our members, Roger Reynolds, played for the Falcons back in the day, so out of respect for Roger, I'm pulling for his Falcons. However, in honor of the Patriots, I will be deflating my sermon by 3 minutes. Oh, no, really. If you need help understanding that, talk to me after the service. Today we're going to begin a new series called God Is. And we want to, in this series, explore attributes of God and who God is, and even the idea of, is there a God? And I know for a lot of people, that's an intellectual battle that they have. And I know that that's something that a lot of people struggle with. But a lot of us who profess to believe in God sometimes act as if God doesn't exist. A lot of us who say we believe in God, we say that, we assert it on Sundays when we come to worship, but we act as if God has no strength and no power, no ability, and has no place in our lives as we live our lives. And I think that's because as capable modern people, which John Wesley 250 years ago said, there is nothing more repugnant to modern capable people than grace. As modern capable people, why should we need something outside of ourselves to help us, when we ourselves feel like at times that we have everything we need and that everything depends on us? And so we act as if there is no God, or we have no need for God, because we have what we need. We're capable, we're intelligent, we're strong. If we have issues, we will muster up our own strength and face those issues and take them on. And there's something that's in one sense healthy about that sense of self-reliance that's healthy, but also something very faulty in that thinking. When we get so wrapped up in our strength, we forget we have a source of strength to help us in our need. And so we behave as if there is no God, or at least that we have no need really for God, because we've got the answers. We've got it figured out. And that is right up until you face something that's bigger than you are. You ever face something that's just bigger than you are, that just overwhelms you, that you hit a place in your life where you've tried and yet there's something in front of you that's just bigger than you are. You may not ever feel like you need God unless you've been at that place, but if you've been at that place, you may know what I'm talking about. There are some things that you face in life that are so overwhelming and so big, you know you need help. And the Bible flips this kind of conventional wisdom on its head, because the Bible tells us that when we're weak, then we're strong. That is to say that when we acknowledge our weakness, when we acknowledge our need for something more, that's when we find out there is something more. There's strength available to us. Jesus said, "How blessed you are, those of you who have poverty of the Spirit." If you are poor in your soul, you know you have need. You know you need something more. And God so loved the world that God sent Jesus into the world to be that something more for us. That grace upon grace that we need, that strength that we need to face those issues of life that bring us to our knees. That when we face something so overwhelming and you try to do it on your own strength, you're doomed. But when you know you have a need and you express that need and you allow God to help you, how much strength you have then to face those battles, to fight those fights, to deal with whatever it is that's in front of you. That's the secret, I think. There's something about acknowledging our need and acknowledging that God is that something more that meets that need. The Apostle Paul talked about this when he was talking about, that the fact that he was talking to the Corinthian church, that he could, of all people, he could boast of incredible revelations that he had of God's grace and the experience of God, that he could boast. If anybody could boast in their own strength, he was able to do that. But he said, I can't really do that because I'm not strong like that. And he talks about this affliction that he has, that he's prayed about 3 times. He's prayed about this thorn in the flesh, this issue that's bigger than he is, that's before him, and he doesn't know exactly what to do with that. Some people, have speculated what that thorn in the flesh was. Some people believe it was a physical ailment. Some people believe it might have been some kind of an addiction that he was battling and dealing with. Some people believe it was some speculation from some scholars think it was women problems that he had, that he's thorn in the flesh. He doesn't know what to do. He's trying to figure out, how do I handle this? And 3 times he prayed to the Lord, and it's like this spiritual warfare that's going on. He felt like it was a messenger from Satan that had been sent to torment him. And so he's under this spiritual warfare as he's dealing with this demonic issue, this overwhelming kind of paralyzing kind of problem that's in front of him. How do I deal with this? And on his own strength, he couldn't. So he prays. 3 times he prays, God, remove this from me. And God never removed it from him. But each time God spoke an answer to him. My grace is sufficient. My grace is enough. My grace is more. Maybe someone here today that needs to hear that because you've been battling something on your own strength and you think, why am I not strong enough to handle this? Well, no one of us is strong enough to handle a lot of things that we face in life. We need what only God can give. And the gift that God has given us of the grace of Jesus Christ is that something more. That's something that we need that helps us to face those daily battles. When we've been praying and we don't know what else to do, we need to know there's a source of strength for us to strengthen us in those moments. There is something more, and we all need that something more. And that's why we all need what only God can offer us and what God has offered us in the person of Jesus Christ. Last Sunday, I made a classic dad mistake. In my sermon, I told a story about the birth of my son. I told the story of the birth of my son on a day that was my middle child's birthday. She was okay about it, but some other people gave me a really hard time about that. You know, typical dad, you know. So I shared with her that I was saving the story of her birth for this Sunday, because it's one of those stories in my life that still speaks to me. But she was born January the 29th, and it was the day before the Super Bowl. I remember us wheeling into the labor and delivery room, and the Cowboys were playing the Bills the second time in a row. If you remember those glory days, that was a long time ago. 23 years ago, I can tell you. And so we rolled in, and I just happened to notice there was a TV. So I said, if this goes long, I'm good. You know, there's a TV right there in the labor and delivery room. I thought that was awesome. And I just expected it to go like our oldest child, Erin, when she was born. I just figured it would go just like that. We'd go through labor, or Lori would go through labor. This is really tough on dads, I just want to tell you. And it would all just go just like the first time. And as soon as we got in, we knew it was a couple of weeks early, but as soon as we got in, they started talking about the baby being in distress. And they put a heart monitor on, and I'll never forget the sound of that monitor and watching the monitor of the heartbeat and watching that baby's heart rate just crash. And the doctors all bursting into the room and wheeling my wife out and telling me they were going to do an emergency C-section, and they put me in a holding cell. Felt like that, and said, we'll come get you in just a moment and bring you into the surgery operating room. And I'm in this room for what felt like an eternity. Have you ever had something that was so overwhelming it brought you to your knees? I mean, literally, where you were so overwhelmed, you heard some news, you got a phone call, you experienced something, and you literally fell to your knees, overwhelmed by what was happening. I fell to my knees in that room, and I prayed, and I was so afraid for my child, for my wife, what was happening. Now, during that time, I was working with a spiritual director. My spiritual director, the week before that, we'd been through an exercise where he was talking to me about fear and living with faith in the face of fear. And he was asking me the question, what's your greatest fear? And I'd said the words, something happening to my family. What's your greatest fear? And I'll never forget his follow-up question, because it was so important. It has been so important to me through the years as I try to live my faith. He said, so if your worst fear came true, what would God do? What would God do? Which is really a great question. And all I could think about was God would be there. God would be there. So there in that little waiting area, as I knelt down and was praying, I felt this overwhelming presence that Christ was with me. I felt this presence that spoke to my heart and said, I've got you, I've got them, no matter what. That moment has meant the world to me through the years, because I've gone back to that moment time and time again. If your worst fear came true, what would God do? What would God do? Well, Katie was okay. She had a knot in her umbilical cord, and every contraction was pulling that tight and cutting off her circulation, but she was fine. And what I came to realize after that was that no matter what, God had her. I've tried to remember that with each one of my children. God has them. No matter what, God has them. If your worst fear came true, what would God do? How do you live your life not on your own strength? Because let's face it, there's some things we come up against, we're just not strong enough. How do you trust that God's strength is that something more? This communion meal is one of those outward and visible expressions. It's an outward and visible, tangible reminder that God's grace is that something more. That you have a source of strength beyond your own to help you. And as you come to the table today, I want to invite you to come knowing that you are weak and knowing that you have a need and trusting that God is meeting that need even now. That God's grace is sufficient for this moment. God's grace is more than whatever your biggest problem is this day. And it's God's grace that will carry you through. You're invited to come to this table and receive.